Hello everyone, this is Day 9, aka Sean Plot, and it is currently November 19th, 2000 and whatever, and it is the Day 9 Daily number 20. I'm just going to go ahead and set things up, get the mic synced, and then we shall be off to analyzing the shit out of Fighting Spirit. The emphasis of today is map analysis, not doing anyone in particular. Alright, that sync should be pretty good. Hello everyone, it's me again. I'm not doing my glasses today. They're over there somewhere, I don't really know, and I'm drinking green tea. Oh my god, it's so good. It's so fantastic. Nothing really new going on in the life of Day 9. Just relaxing a little bit because I submitted a game to the Independent Games Festival for the students. If you want to look it up, it's called Static Alchemist. And the reason we chose that name is because it's S, and we don't know if they're judging reverse alphabetically or forward alphabetically, so we just put something that had S in there because that was about in the middle. So hopefully we're going to be judged last, because we're allowed to submit builds as many times as we want. So, yes. The goal today is to do map analysis. We're going to do a whole lot of talking. I have like 15 million examples to show you in YouTube, because the last thing I'd want is just to stare into the screen and talk, which I know that many of you would like that oh so much. But I figured that for most of you who are reasonable, I may as well just go ahead and do the normal sort of thing. So, the map I want to look at first is Gaia. Let me actually zoom in a little bit and check this bad boy out. Right, this is a map that I'm specifically choosing this one first because I'm certain that pretty much everyone here has played this map. I'm sure maybe some of you haven't gotten the chance to look at something like Fighting Spirit or Match Point or some of those other new ones like Eye of the Storm. I'm going to get to those, but I want to use Gaia as a starting point to make sure we're on the same thought process when we're analyzing map. Here is the big key, right? I'm going to go ahead and mute the chat. Here is the huge key. Anytime you're analyzing any map at all, in fact, in StarCraft, you need to think about the mid-game first. That's going to be the huge point. That's like actually the entire basis of this little speecheroo, is that the mid-game is the fundamental key. It is the linchpin to whatever strategy you're trying to do, is that you have a good mid-game plan. Because things that people tend to think about StarCraft as a fan, right? They say, well, at the start, I'm choosing my build, and then I have to deal with all these possibilities, and it fans out. There's a million different things that can go on at the end, so I need to play more and more and more to figure out what's going on over here. And that's why people spend so much time talking about build orders, posting on forums going, oh, what do I do here? Oh my god, to hell with build orders. We're not even going to think about the opening. That is what we're going to do last. The reason I say think about the mid-game first is because things tend to flow into the mid-game. It's very, very small, the set of possibilities in that mid-game. So we're going to start off, we're just going to think about, let's just pick a matchup at random, Zerg vs. Terran. Perfect, I love that matchup. Zerg vs. Terran. Think about what the mid-game looks like. Generally, there's a mid-game push by Terran. Terran has about 5 barracks, 2 engineering bays, probably adding on his second one if he doesn't have it already. He has 1 factory and 1 starport, and he's making out of all these things. He also has his main and his natural. That is the look of Terran right in the mid-game. Before then, he could have done any weird number of options, and after that, he might be really aggressive, he might expand early, he might transition into 2 starports with science vessels, he might transition into extra factories, he might focus just more on barracks. A lot of possibilities after, a lot of possibilities before, one about-ish possibility in the middle. The other half of the matchup, Zerg. What does Zerg look like? Zerg generally has his main, his natural, another expansion. That's about 4 hatcheries he's running on, going for a 5th. He's getting the +1 carapace upgrade. He has some mutalisks he harassed with in the early game, and he has a lurker-laying army protecting him as he techs to hive. This always happens in the mid-game. This is like the standardest thing in the world. So, what I want to do is I want to briefly look at this, and let's think about what I want to do in the mid-game here. Because if we think about mid-game convergence, it means that if I have a good plan for the mid-game that's solid, all of a sudden, based upon my opening, the decisions happen completely naturally. I don't have to post in a forum and go, oh, well, I'm opening Dark Templar and I'm encountering this. What do I do? Instead, if I have this mid-game plan, it said, okay, here's my mid-game plan, and I'm opening up Dark Templar. I have this problem. How do I still get to this mid-game? And we're all going to see the example right here highlight all those things. And I'm going to try to go through it in about 3 or 4 minutes so we can spend as much time as we can discussing this map, Fighting Spirit, which of course is such an epic map it doesn't even fit in the viewer window. But let's go back to baby little Gaia here. So, the thing that I noted when I was developing my Zerg vs. Terran on this map is that I love this nice open middle, how it's wide, but it's small enough that you can kind of hold it off with some lurkers. So I decided that I wanted to do a Hydralisk Lurker mid-game. That's what I wanted. I wanted a really big Hydra Lurker mid-game. In order to do this, the mid-game look I wanted was my main, my natural. I wanted 2 expansions, not just 1, which is the usual thing. I wanted 2 expansions, that's 4 gas total. I wanted 2 evolution chambers upgrading. I needed a Spire up for Scourge. Obviously to kill the drop ships, and I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be doing any Mutalisk openings, so I wanted the Overlord speed upgrades, so that way I could cover everything a little bit easier. So let's look back at this map. Let us pretend for a minute that we're not in vertical positions. I call vertical positions if I'm here, and my guy who's directly above me, that would be a vertical position, so if we're both on this right half of the map, or on this left half of the map, we're vertical to one another. So let's ignore that possibility and say I spawn right down here. So my opponent spawns either here or here. So that's the setup we have right now. And I know what my mid-game setup is going to be. Let's think about early expand. Okay, so let's say my opponent early expands here. Well, I'm going to take my Lurkerling army early, I'm going to burrow it right here, and then as I expand here and here, I'm going to power like crazy with drones and throw down my evolution chambers, then go back and get the Hydralisk range and speed upgrade, and the last thing that will end up finishing before that Terran mid-game push happens is I will have Hydralisk speed and Hydralisk range, in addition to my huge-ass Lurker army. Awesome. What happens, though, if my opponent opens up for fast gas? Well, all of a sudden now I have to deal with things like 2 Starport Wraith. I have to deal with harassment from Vultures early on. I have to deal with maybe some mech tank push. So in those circumstances, I just stay very tight in here, and I end up getting Hydralisk with speed first, and then slowly teching up towards a layer so I can get that Overlord speed upgrade, again to deal with race or that sort of thing. And then as I push out, I research Lurker speed, I research Lurkers, and then I take these 2 expansions, and then I morph Lurkers in the middle. Notice how I did 2 drastically different things there. Against an early expanding player, I went for Lurkers and Lings first, and powered really hard. Against the fast gassing player, I went for Hydralisks in order to defend, and then eventually got the Lurkers. But the same thing ended up happening in the mid-game, because that's the way that I planned it out. If my opponent goes for some sort of really aggressive one-base strategy, like a fast tank push, or even 3 barracks into just a standard tank and then science vessel, just off 1 base, then I tend to stay back. I tend not to go for this expansion here and then this expansion here. I tend to just stay nice and tightly packed in here, and the other things that I wanted to get anyways, such as the Evo Chambers, the Spire, the Overlord speed, I'm getting along the way. And then, as I'm able to break out, then I get the expansions. So we see 3 different situations. Again, to recap, against an early expander, I'm Lurkering earlier, doing a lot of expanding, then getting the Hydralisks. Against a fast gassing, I'm getting the Hydralisks to defend, and then getting Lurker as I expand. In the last case, I'm going Lurkerling, and then building a whole lot of those structures I couldn't... I'm building all the structures that I can until I break out and then take my expansions. Same thing going on. Now, sometimes I won't have the opportunity of being in these horizontal positions. My opponent will be up here, for instance, and I'll be down here. And you'll note that as I was describing, like if we just imagine this divide, and I was saying if I'm here and my opponent's here, I was circling this expansion here and this expansion here, as opposed to the main, which is so common. That's because if I have a big army, walking up to defend this and over to defend here is far easier than wandering up awkwardly to this main and leaving my entire big mid-game army up here. So obviously, if I am in vertical positions here, it's really unlikely I'm going to be expanding to the Terran's natural, and even swinging all the way over here prevents me from getting any sort of good, solid place to defend. If my Terran opponent's here and I'm here, I can just burrow Lurkers in the middle, and I've defended pretty much this half of the map. But in vertical positions, I need to make some adjustments. Therefore, I suddenly now know when I'm going to make a deviation from my mid-game plan. It's not, ooh, I opened with Dark Templar, and now I'm at this point, and I don't know what to do. It's me saying, I've been trying to bend everything into this Hydra Lurk mid-game all this time, but I just can't quite seem to make it work when we're in vertical positions, and now I'm abandoning it and doing something completely different. Or, for instance, if my opponent goes mech, I can open up going Hydralisks and then never transition into that Lurker mid-game. But really, there's still just 3 mid-games that I end up thinking about. My big-ass Hydra Lurk army, which helps inform all of my opening decisions, and, as a result, informs when I deviate for vertical positions, and when I deviate if my opponent is going mech. Voila, there we go. All of this was thanks to the fact that I thought about the mid-game first, and as I practiced more and more and more, I tried to force everything into that mid-game. So as we're going to look at all these maps, the first thing I'm always going to do is say, what's going on with the mid-game? So let's go ahead and swing over to the screen. Let's back out so we can actually see all of Fighting Spirit here. There we go. So here we have it. Let me actually try to zoom in just a little bit more. So I do want to talk about this map in a general sense, but what we'll end up doing is I'm going to focus on Protoss vs. Zerg and Terran vs. Terran at the end, and I have a whole bunch of YouTube videos that we're going to use to look at that. So when I look at Fighting Spirit, I note only the big aspects of the map. I mean, don't get too specific. Players tend to just be like, oh man, well maybe I can squeeze a tank right behind there, or maybe if I put a tank here I can shoot over. I mean, tactics are great and everything, but let's look at just the big, broad fundamentals. Let's think in as low of terms as possible, nothing fancy. Let's imagine that we're in this top right position in all this analysis. Immediately, what I note is that my third base, my third gas, is very easy to take. I mean, look at how thin these ramps are. I think these have actually been widened since it's been released into the Pro League, but I believe that this is just an old map. But either way, even if this is wider or narrow, these are very, very easy to expand. They're on high ground, it's a small amount of area, there is a thin ramp leading out to the middle, and it's directly connected to here. So that is one big thing I notice, is that your third is really easy to take, so you sort of get your half of the diamond, or I guess your quadrant of the diamond up here in the corner. After that, though, it becomes increasingly difficult to take a fourth. This would be the natural fourth expansion for a base here. And again, this is any matchup. I'm just talking in very broad terms right now. This seems like the most reasonable choice, but still, this little entrance here can be problematic. There is a pretty clear splitting element down the middle as well. Just the fact that because the mains are very evenly distributed and there's not any weird expansions like there would be on Python or something like that, that you can end up with those half map splits. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but again, the easy third and the harder fourth is what's important to emphasize. The second big thing is it's a very big center, very wide open, but it's also circular. So as we saw in Flash versus Best the other day, we saw Flash clearly choosing either to push this way or to push up north, and that sort of informed a lot of how he was expanding and everything. As he was pushing this way, he was trying to expand here and this sort of thing. So, based on all that, what is clear to me is that these three bases are pretty essential to doing anything later on in the game, because the only way to defend this broad center area, and as a result defend your fourth and fifth bases and whatever, is to just have a big ass army. Also, I also want to briefly note this center expansion is pretty significant. Center expansions are particularly useful for Terrans in Terran vs. Protoss is very helpful, because Terrans who are creeping across the map will eventually secure the middle just by virtue of having so much stuff, so that's a useful spot. By far the most important use of a center double gas is in Protoss vs. Zerg. Protosses who develop a huge ass center army can defend that middle expansion quite easily, and ends up being a big benefit in terms of Archons. If you're looking for any reference for that, watch lots of Freeze games on Andromeda. Free was a genius about timing when he took that center expansion and got a significant amount of wins. And also it's a great illustration of how just having a huge army allows him to do it. So thinking about Terran, how they'll end up playing this, definitely in Terran vs. Protoss, I like taking this a little bit earlier. I don't see a lot of early stuff we could do in Terran vs. Protoss to necessarily abuse any terrain. There's not a lot of cute tanking positions, and as a result, not a lot of cute lurkering or storm dropping positions. These strike me as a little bit storm droppable, just because there's a touch of space there. But I think openness and the fact that this third is so easy to take is really the most important parts. Also, these mains have a pretty narrow choke. That's kind of narrow. Even though it looks open because there's not that much mountain there, that amount of space there's pretty low. Other things I notice when I'm seeing this map is, my god, look at how easy that main is to defend from drops. If you take these two expansions, your main is very safe. So, not a harassment-friendly game in the mid-game. Nothing too significant that you could even really do to break into your opponent's face. A lot of it is just going to be timing your expansions and getting an econ that's solid in the mid-game. So now I want to shift my emphasis over to Protoss vs. Zerg and think about everything that we just said in the context of Protoss vs. Zerg. And then after that, we're going to do some Terran vs. Terrans. But first, I'm going to drink some of my wholesome green tea. Oh my god. It literally gets better every single time I drink it. It's outrageous. So from a Zerg's point of view, I really love the idea of taking another main as a mid-game strategy, because if I take this as my third, again, we're assuming that I'm in this position as Zerg. If I take this and then I take this, this feels a little bit, I mean, it's pretty easy to hold this in general, but we encounter problems, say, if my Protoss opponent is located down here, because if he's expanding here and I'm expanding here, look at the walk distance. It's like nothing. So, I mean, if I'm here, I kind of want to expand there if I'm keeping on this theme of taking a side expansion as my third. But, I mean, especially if I'm taking this is kind of difficult to go for. And also, remember how I said that these mains were so narrow? Hey, if you just take this, you're in golden shape. Let's look at an example of not taking that expansion first. Of instead taking this bottom expansion. So this is a game. This is Han versus Roro. This is one of the early games. Oh my god! My face almost exploded. So I mean, just look at this position already. This is immediately just feels uncomfortable as Zerg if you're in this sort of situation. I mean, look at these Mutalisks are here. Zealots are able to freely walk up here. We have all these Mutalisks. Look how far away they are from the Protoss main right now. And they're going to have to keep bouncing back here. I mean, finally he was able to defend, but these Zealots got a free chance to walk up to this high ground. And Protoss is getting to prepare. He's built his cannons. He has his Corsairs up. So we're just going to go skip ahead because I actually have a total of 8 videos I want to show. And the Protoss' game plan, on the other hand, is going to revolve around taking this fourth really early on. There's really no need to try to put huge pressure on your opponent here with huge two-base armies because it's so easy to defend. I mean, even though we have Roro in a pretty good situation, or excuse me, even though Roro's in a pretty bad situation, he's still in a decent position to defend all of these expansions. He's just not in a decent position to really do much else. So we have the usual sort of play from Han, adding on Corsairs, advancing in time. Yeah, we have some lurkers going on here, but look at this. Still stuck on these 3 bases, and look at how... See this? This is a drone moving right over here. And if we look back at Fighting Spirit as a map, if you're trying to take this bottom position, I mean, you're spreading yourself out so much. You have an attack path here, you have an attack path here, and then there's looping around here. I mean, if you take this, you at least secure that main, but, you know, it's kind of close in the middle of the map. I mean, you've set yourself up to be in an incredibly difficult position. And I mean, as this game advances on, it looks like Roro is making a pretty significant effort to deny this expansion, but Han is easily going to be able to take it. I mean, again, if you get delayed in Han's position... Oh yeah, let's see, look at this. Look at this lone Zealot giving this entire expansion a run for its money. I mean, he's just killing it. This, I just do not like taking this side expansion, because even though you get this Hydra Lurk army that everyone loves, and you have your Mutalisk sniping out Templar, that mid-game decision's kind of because now Protoss, even though you've delayed him a whole bunch with these Mutas and this army, he's still going to get this expansion whenever he wants. And you're stuck in this really awkward situation where you're desperately trying to get a fourth and you just can't. So, moving right along, I mean, here comes a big attack by the Zerg. Even if Zerg didn't catch himself at the worst possible attack angle, this army was just not going to be alive too much longer. And, I mean, to be frank, like, why are you moving forward as Roro? I mean, look at this map. Look at how tightly defended this is just via terrain. How are you going to expect to break in and then move forward, especially when there's an army out in the middle? I just do not like any sort of mid-game aggression. I mean, similarly on Outsider, I wouldn't like any sort of mid-game aggression like that. And then look, I mean, it's just easy cleanup from this point. We see some movement in the middle. But then, yeah, cleanup. I mean, nothing too significant. Protoss is clearly in an advantageous situation with these expansions. Looks like he's continuing to spread around the map. Good stuff, good stuff. So this now takes us to 0 against Gosi Flying. Now here is the standard look. Notice how I've zoomed all of these games straight to the mid-game. I'm not fucking around, man. I did say I was going to emphasize the mid-game. And we'll get a chance to come back to openings, but the mid-game is the most important thing. I'm actually going to address openings after I do all this mid-game stuff. This is the look that Zerg players started to like a lot more. It's using this ultra-turtley style of hatch placement at your natural, but then also at the other main snap. God almighty, I'm so bad at that. I sincerely hope I remember that next time. Actually, let me go ahead and turn down the volume on all these videos, because I'm getting really tired of my face exploding every time I want to show you something I think is cool. Oh my goodness. Whew, man, that was a doozy. Yeah, it's really this turtling style. See, now, look, we have a pretty solid mid-game for Zerg. I mean, already, if we look over at this expansion, if we can secure this main and this expansion here, and again, fortunately, Zerg was up here. Look at my planning on that one. This expansion is still super easy for us to take. Likewise, if our Protoss opponent is down here, if we expand over here and then take this main, so we kind of have this top half of the map, this expansion is really easy to make. Look at how our mid-game planning now is suddenly giving us incredible opportunities in the late game. It's not like Zero's just saying, well, it's sort of my style to take another natural. I mean, it's just he's looking at the map and saying, what can I do in the mid-game to set myself up in a beautiful position for the late game? And that's it. Now, from a Protoss's point of view, this is the sort of style I like a lot. Is this Bisu style, is focusing on taking this third expansion, and because you can do it so quickly, you only need 4 gateways and a handful of Corsairs just to distract Zerg in order to safely take this expansion. And we're going to see a game of Protoss winning quite severely with that, and taking all this sort of stuff into consideration. And the reason I chose these games is it's a natural progression. Game 1, that we just ended up seeing back there, Game 1 is an example of how attempts at taking another map's logic and applying it to this new map failed. Right? Like, just putting the expansion at the bottom totally screwed Roro up, and the rest of his game was kind of, I mean, what expansion are you going to take next? But here, you know, oh my god, this is such a great setup. Really, really solid. And see, look, just waltzing his first units right up there. I would not be surprised if that was just 5 or 6 Zealots there taking that expansion, because the advantage of having a thin ramp is just so great. And, I mean, a lot of times I say move out to attack whenever you take your expansion, but just sending units to defend it is entirely reasonable as well. Zerg correctly, leaving some units there just to continue to scout that. But yeah, so now Protoss's goal, clearly when he takes this expansion, is to figure out some way to pound a 4-base player apart, either to have a 3-base timing push against one of these expansions, to do this sort of harassment and to put pressure on the fronts. You're going to be doing a lot of back and forth movement in the mid-game in order to force your opponent to build lurkers, sunkens, and spores when he doesn't want to. Oh, I thought there was 2 in the gas. I was about to freak out. How many games have you lost with just 2 in the gas? I've probably lost at least a few hundred. And that's no joke. Believe me, Zerg vs. Zergs go by fast. And in terms of Zerg's game plan, if you're focusing your mid-game on this spread-outness of having two other mains, you have to do a lot of sort of back-and-forth defense, a lot of fragile defense in that sense. So you need to maximize the efficiency of your Zerglings in terms of keeping Protoss under check. Run your Zerglings in to kill off Templar, and most importantly, run your Zerglings in to kill off building expansions. So the usual sorts of things. So the Protoss is continuing to put pressure, but this is kind of cool seeing this amount of Zerglings come out of Zero. And what was really interesting about this game is that Zero builds only Zerglings in the mid-game and uses all his gas later for Ultralisks. So now, look at what Zero did. He said, my mid-game plan is to take all these bases, but because I'm stockpiling gas on these 4 bases, what I'm going to make my late-game plan is a bunch of Ultralisks. That's what I want to do in the late game. That's the focus of my late game play. I'm lacking a little bit of direction from Gosei's point of view. He pretty much is just making units right now, but I would prefer if he had some more specific combinations. Like we have Corsairs running around killing stuff, but why? Are we planning Dark Templar drops? Are we exploiting spread out Overlords? Doesn't look like either of those is going on. I do prefer Reavers in this case whenever an opponent is this sort of turtled way. So again, if I were playing Protoss, what I would say my mid-game plan is to take this top expansion, and if my opponent is not doing this style, if say Zero had instead taken this expansion, I'm going to use a bunch of gateways to secure the mid, prevent my opponent from taking a 4th, and eventually win. And if my opponent is going for this sort of turtle style, then I will transition to Reavers, and that will be my future plan. Not a huge amount of possibilities there. Very few, because we're focusing on the mid-game first. And the rest of this game, I'm not really going to focus on too much. Oh yeah, see, there are the Reavers. Yeah, that's right. This game's coming back to me now. Really beautiful job. Even if the opponent wasn't going for all these Zerglings, these Reavers would still be a huge benefit. And look, Gosei almost breaks in, but for some reason something went wrong with his economy early on, and he just didn't have a lot of stuff. So here is yet another game of Zhangbi versus Effort, which is yet another illustration of this taking of the other mains first instead of taking of these side expansions. And Protoss is doing the usual sort of Zealot Archon army in the mid-game. But, and look, taking this bottom 3rd expansion nice and fast. And this is the sort of stuff you want to be doing, is just having a handful of key units defending it. The usual sort of Corsair play, and everything seems to be going pretty well. Here's an example of, in the mid-game, why it's so important to maximize efficiency with your Zerglings. If you can run in and do this sort of stuff, you can delay this expansion way more than seems reasonable. And again, more examples of the same sort of mid-game we're seeing again and again and again. And again, I'm going to finish up with talking about the early game. Because we want the mid-game to help us decide how we're going to play the early game. So now we have these Mutalisks coming out. They're going to be able to do quite a bit of damage. There's Effort, who's very good. He's our BlizzCon champion, which I'm sure everyone was super pumped about. I got to get pictures with him. I was pretty pumped. And look at this nice planning by Protoss. So notice how this is very, very similar to the look of the last game, the game we just saw. We saw Gosei flying, getting a whole bunch of Corsairs like this, and using this sort of big Zealot army in the middle, Zealot Archon army. But in this game, Effort does something completely different. He doesn't go mass Zerglings. He instead goes for some Mutalisks here. But the Corsairs popped out just in time. See, this is very similar to how I was saying that all my thought in Zerg vs. Terran on Gaia revolved around that mid-game push. I was thinking, how do I hold it off? How do I transition into this Hydra Lurker army in order to not die? And here, it's how do I transition into this early 3rd base without dying from a bunch of ground units, without dying to Lurkers, without dying to Mutalisks. So Gosei was able to deal with the bunch of ground units, and here we see Zhangbi able to deal with all these Mutalisks. And here's something I was saying earlier. Look at this way of extending the purpose. Look at this. Here's a subtle transition. So both Gosei and Zhangbi did the same look in terms of building units and taking this expansion early. The same theme. But now we're starting to see one of those many deviations for the later stages of the game. Zhangbi's building a few extra Corsairs and using them in order to do some of this later mid-game harassment. I mean, he's going to get repelled. He has to pull up a little bit, but then he kills off this overlords and continues to bring the ruckus. Good response by Effort. Very strong player. Building that spore colony. A nice, good crisis management there. That's always the sign of a hallmark. Well, excuse me. The hallmark of an expert player is really good crisis management like this. Being comfortable enough to just build a spore in a good location. It's not thrown down willy-nilly. Defends the spire. Keeps track of a lot of the key buildings. Obviously, you can't build it in a way that defends everything too much, but I really think the spire is pretty important. A little unfortunate that he lost the pool, but again, same sort of mid-game look going on. A lot of normal stuff going on. These Dark Templar were incorporated in, were a planned element. And I'm going to slowly scroll forward as we see now. Aha, yes, here are more elements of this mid-game opening. We see that here are some of the really big aggressive pushes that we're trying to make. A good timing push to kill off our opponent. And now, naturally, a question for the later stages of the game is how to take the 4th expansion. Unfortunately, in this game, it's not quite loading properly, but we have Effort doing these really nice double-pronged attacks, not really taking any damage as he's doing this. And look, because he took this half of the map with the mains, boom, that expansion goes down. Deflam. And we have some kind of sexy stuff going on with shuttles, but I don't care about this stuff. I care more about the decisions that happen in the mid-game, because that's the whole damn point of this talk. Whoa, I skipped over something important. A whole main just disappeared. And you know what? This is stuff that I would call like icing on the cake. Seeing the Protoss opponent bust in and have this dramatic finish to the game can make a game really fun to watch, but I don't want anyone to think that this is the strategically important part of this game, that bust in. I think it's more important to think about everything that led up to it, such as taking this expansion, the fact that he's transitioned to Reavers. We see his shuttle with Reavers going on there. Yeah, Reavers are so cool. And then, after a very dramatic game, we see that Effort is able to come out on top barely. So we've been doing this thing for about 30 minutes now, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with one last game. This is Savior vs. Kal. Really good game. Look, the same sort of stuff going on here. Yet in the last 2 games, we saw Protoss suffer some defeat. And here's the transition I really like. Here's the creative thinking. Still going for the same mid-game goal, but of course we need to think about our opponent's mid-game, which is these wide spread out expansions. But if we look at the map, now, after we've done this big analysis of, okay, we need a big center army to do things, and here's an easy-to-defend third, after we've done this sort of analysis and we've started to play a lot, now is when we go back and look and say, what are some tactical abuses I can do? So Savior's located up here, start in the top right corner. Oh, what good planning on my part. He expanded here and then here, but I was saying at the start, and have said many times in this cast, that when you spawn here, taking this expansion is pretty easy. And you end up defending your main once you've taken these 2 expansions. But if I'm just taking my main and my natural, and this main and this natural, I sacrifice defending this ridge. And that's what's absolutely beautiful about Kal's mid-game consideration. Look at this. He has a very standard low gateway count, taking this bottom expansion. He even has 4 or 5 zealots down there in order to defend this expansion. I mean, he ends up losing them, again, because of the very efficient use of Zerglings, which is what you should be aiming to do as Zerg. But he also just gets a shuttle. I mean, not a speed shuttle, not like he's getting Reavers. He's just getting the shuttle because he was getting the observatory anyways to do stuff. And now he can really exploit this little tactical aspect of this map. It's so easy to become so caught up in tactics and not to just state the obvious facts about the map. Only by stating the obvious facts about the map and looking at it from a very objective standpoint is Kal in this very effective setup. And this is the extra little bit that will let you win a lot more games. Is this sort of cool stuff. This is fun to watch, but this isn't nearly as important as the fact that this expansion is still going down here. Not that many gateways being added in here. Good timing on the observer too, getting it right out there when the lurkers are there. This is going to screw the Zerg up quite a bit. I love this because really, this relies on no luck at all. I mean, for instance, I remember playing against my brother long ago, and I was saying that storm drops were giving me a little bit of trouble. And he started playing games where he just rushed for storm drops, and it really threw me off. I mean, he would go like expand, gateway, gateway, robo, storm drop. I mean, like 3 gates, like, what are you doing this game? Oh, I'm storm dropping, and then I'm going to figure out how to win. And it just threw me off so much for so many games. But eventually, once I just, got a Spire early and started doing Spire-type plays, and also still why in my life I emphasize Spires no matter what I'm doing, I just started to kill the shuttle, and he was fucked, man. There was nothing he could do to come back, because it was a play that relied on luck. It relied on this chance element that's, oh god, I hope my opponent doesn't get that Spire out. But this army walked with the shuttle to that point on the side ridge, and it would be very difficult for the Zerg player to actually prevent this from happening, especially considering the Protoss can bounce back and forth between these 2 locations so easily. And that's what I love. It's very stable. And let's say, just by some chance, the Zerg has tons of Scourge patrolling here, and you just can't get up. What have you lost? Nothing. You have a shuttle for drop, and everything is, still normal. You still have this huge army here. And look, see more nice timing pushes coming in by Protoss. Again, this all relies on this mid-game planning. I'm going to say that 1,000 million billion times, but this game continues on. Let me just slide this up for another 20 minutes. It's a really dramatic game. But this is the sort of advantage that Kyle built up early. I largely think it went on so long because Savior's just a very good player, even though, there's all bazillion discussions about whether or not he's the bon roi and this sort of thing. But see, here's a little bit of what I was alluding to at the start, is that if we look back at Fighting Spirit, if we look at this map, I was saying that if we spawn here, we can take this really easily, and the next most reasonable place to take is this, especially considering we're focusing our efforts on a really big mid-game army. And that's what we see Call doing. He has his main here, his Expo, he's taking this, and then the transition out of the mid-game is to take this expansion, which might look a little bit awkward because it's Savior's expansion, but we love looking awkward. We're StarCraft players. Who are we kidding, right? And see, look, same sort of themes going on in this game. Taking this expansion up here. We're all thinking about the mid-game. So, good stuff. Good stuff. Alright, awesome. And see, here's the Reaver push. And the game ends up being great, amazing. There was an attempt at an expansion here. It didn't end up going properly. I kind of breezed over the expand focus down there. But see, look at this troop movement. Moving over here to the left and up, as opposed to going up and then left to this expansion. And by going left and up, defends this bottom. Beautiful. Excellent. Kick-ass. So we have a few Terran vs. Terran videos in the mix. So, question is, well, gee, Sean, what do I do in the early game? Because I'm still one of those players who posts in forums and says, what build do I do? How do I deal with the early game? So let's think about this from Zerg's point of view. You want to take the other main, and you want to do your 5-hatch style play. You want to do that ultra turtley style. Well, honestly, opening up with 3-hatch, rush for Spire, and then into 5-hatch, exactly like you would with 5-hatch Hydralisk, that sort of play that we were discussing earlier on in the Liquid Poker Q&A, or Liquipedia Q&A. That seems fine, except instead of getting Hydralisks, you would get Lurkers, or you would get Mutalisks afterwards. There, great, we have set an opening. What if my opponent tries to do early Zealot Harass? Well, I guess I would practice against a friend, tell him to Zealot Rush, and try to figure out my Zergling timing. What about against a player who, what are some other weird circumstances? I guess you would be questioning about early Zealot pushes with your opponent. You'd be questioning against Dark Templar and a whole lot of Corsairs and maybe even Reavers. And if you start practicing all these with the basic framework of, hey, I'm going to go 3-hatch into 5-hatch and then do this mid-game plan. If you begin with that framework, all of a sudden, you have arrows for your losses. You lose, and your loss says, oh, well, adjust in this way, because we know where you want to end up, so great. We suddenly no longer have to say, well, what is it that I want to do? Answer that question, and then say, well, how do I do that best? We've already decided what we want to do. Therefore, we can spend a lot of time just thinking about how to go about doing that best. And from the Protoss's point of view, I would begin by doing the usual Corsair opening and transitioning into like 4 gateways. If I didn't want to do that, let's say that's not my style. Here's a great way to do a stylistic difference. I can go straight for Zealot leg speed, get the +1 attack early on, and still end up taking my expansion with ease. I can still take that south expansion right here. So let's say I'm down here on this screen. Let's say I want to take this south expansion right here. I can just get Zealots, and I can move out really early. It puts a ton of pressure on Zerg, because these Zealots are coming out earlier than if you'd gone Corsair. And you can just send 1 or 2 to block right down here. Totally awesome. So let me just actually stick right here. So let's think a little bit about Terran versus Terran on this map, because that's the other half of the time I want to spend looking at this sort of thing. And we'll have time just briefly for questions at the end. But when I look at this map in Terran vs. Terran, I see how open this is. There's not a lot of ridges to abuse. There's not a lot of key places to throw tanks down, even though, really everywhere is a key place to throw a tank down. But what I think when I see this map is, man, vultures are going to be really nice in terms of securing this. Actually, let's say I'm spawning here. If my opponent puts vultures here, I'm in a difficult spot, just trying to move out into the middle, and he can continue to exploit how open it is. Or, he can even prevent me from going here. He can just waltz some vultures up, lay mines here, and he can even lay mines in this path. It might be a little harder to lay mines here, just because you have to get so far into my base. And the only good retreat path is across my fat bridge. It's a little bit harder to retreat across these. But, when I look at Terran vs. Terran on my map, that's the biggest thing that I think about in terms of the mid-game, is how am I going to deal with how open this is? Because if I don't, my opponent is going to contain me, and then, if my opponent's, let's say, in this opposite corner on the map, he can contain me with mines, and then he can just expand however he wants and reinforce this region. And as he gets more money, he can get this sort of line going across the map. And what I want is like an even split this way, or an even split this way, or maybe sort of encroach in a little bit. The other key thing that I see on this map is these side expansions are critical. Absolutely critical. Whenever you have that sort of tight, cramped area, it's very easy to defend, and when you have tanks on it with turrets, it's very easy to even get up there to kill it. So, for instance, let's say I'm up here and my opponent's down here, and we're going to do some sort of split down the middle, which, generally happens in Terran vs. Terran. Obviously, this expansion is probably going to end up being mine. But this expansion over here is someplace I want to go for early. I kind of want to bend this in. I maybe want to sacrifice a little bit of mid-control just to secure this expansion and this expansion. So that way I can make just those few extra bit of resources mine. We see this a lot on Destination, for instance. We see players really focusing on those side expansions, because the player who's able to advance a little bit farther forward there ends up winning the game a lot of times, because they just have a resource surplus. So here, quite naturally, I would end up saying that a lot of focus should be on making sure I deal with this sort of thing, and that I put an emphasis on securing these side expansions in a reasonable fashion. Additionally, I totally had another point to say, and it was profound. It was going to be awesome. What was I talking about? I was talking, about how now am I going to open? Because I say we start with the mid-game first, and then we have to decide a little bit about the opening. Here, because there's nothing fancy here that can really go on with terrain, as you could on maybe Neo Harmony or Moonglaive or one of those sorts of maps, because this is sort of closed off, early expanding in my eyes seems like the most reasonable choice, and then going for vultures in some fashion. So here's an example. Again, I've fast-forwarded all the way to the mid-game. Both players have expanded. You get a few tanks just to hold off some stuff early. And look at this. Both players are going to push forward very aggressively, already floating their barracks towards each other. Look at this barracks here. This red barracks already floating towards the middle. Yellow barracks already in position. Oh, by the way, this is Sky High versus Ruby. Ruby is the red player. Sky High is the yellow player. And see, by getting good timing on this move forward, look at this. 3 tanks here. That's a key decision that went on in the early game. Do I get more vultures the way Sky High did, or do I get more tanks the way that Ruby did? The reason I'd want to maybe get more tanks the way Ruby did is because I'm thinking, hell, if I want to secure this thing, I'm going to try to do it as fast as possible. And the way I'm going to secure it super fast is by getting these tanks out very early. See, watch how much ground, look already how much ground Ruby has. He's splitting the map along here. These vultures are going to help deny it, but Ruby still is going to get so much space. Look at this. This is great. And Sky High is thinking, well, I'm going to focus more on getting vultures, because by doing that, a little bit later, a little while after this position, Sky High suddenly has way more vultures than Ruby. That is, unless, of course, Ruby's SCV can take down this... Oh, alas. And see, look at this. We already see Ruby sort of transitioning away, because he sees all these vultures coming out. He sees that there's going to be this aggression here. And we're going to see in a little bit how Ruby ends up dealing with that in another game. But I mean, again, look at this emphasis on mines. So look at the fact that Ruby ended up going for another factory with add-on, and Sky High, on the other hand, ended up going for all these vultures. I'm going to fast forward and watch this minimap. This is actually so cool to see. I'm actually going to slide this down just to make sure absolutely none of the minimap is obscured. Look at this. You're going to see, look how much more space yellow has. Look at all these vultures here. And look, laying all these mines up here, it becomes really difficult to expand to your natural northern half of the map with all these mines here. I mean, Jesus. I mean, if you just look at it, if you're trying to expand up here, because the map's going to be split in half here, if there is more mines than there are people in China located right here, it's going to be a little tough, even if you do have sexy hold position micro. And yeah, I mean, doing this usual sort of thing, like, you know, mining up here and then mining the other places is good. But I mean, definitely securing these key spots in the middle is going to be instrumental. And as we slide forward, and I can't slide too far forward, because you know every Terran vs. Terran game is about 3.5 hours on YouTube. So we're only, again, going to focus on the mid-game. But see, look at how Ruby, who begins focusing more on getting tanks, how he got those factories up earlier, even though it looked like he was going for this contain with vultures. Now he's just transitioning into kind of creeping along his side of the map. And see, he's feeling safe. His opponent mainly has vultures, and we see mainly Goliaths and tanks being added on for Rubies. But really, this is it's a tricky spot to be in. And if I were in Ruby's situation, I would make sure I know how to deal with that. So again, to bring it to a stylistic choice. So if I'm looking at Terran vs. Terran on that map, I say, now do I want to do a big vulture opening and secure the middle, like Sky High, or do I want to do a big tank Goliath opening, a very muscular, strong army, the way that Ruby's doing? If I was doing it Ruby style, then I would slowly creep up to my third gas, get in a secure position for my fourth, secure that, and then maybe start trying to do a whole bunch of drops since I have this gas surplus and all these strong units. If I'm Sky High, I'm going to be thinking, how do I continue to exploit this advantage of position, maybe get way more expansions earlier on, and then make sure I have turrets built in key places so I don't lose because I'm all overextended. Whatever mid-game choice you make, you need to make sure that whatever continuation you make makes sense. That's why we see less space, more muscle from Ruby, and it makes sense. Taking his muscle to secure these handful of expansions. But we have more mines, we have more maneuverability, we have more space for Sky High. Usual sorts of things. So then as the game progresses, I'm just going to drag through this real fast. Look at this line here. Look at this split. Oh my goodness. And then what's going to happen is we're going to drag forward, and then look at this big muscular push. Boom, swing all the way back over. Yeah, alright, go Ruby, he's so cool. And see, now he sort of swings back into his place. And now look, this game looks fairly even. Except for the fact that Ruby, like a huge badass, did exactly what I was talking about earlier, and look, he's bowed the middle and focused on taking this southern and northern expansion. I'm really happy about that. I didn't actually watch this far into this game. Woohoo! I feel like such a clairvoyant. Yeah, I don't even play Terran vs. Terran that much. And when I do, I tend to just go Medic Marine, and then if I lose, I go, LOL, I wasn't trying. You can go like 5,000 Starport Wraith if you want, but the important thing is to focus on just some of those fundamental mid-game considerations. So again, let's look at almost the same thing. Again, we see players doing... Oops, I'm going to scroll this down just a touch. We see players going for this sort of vulture push opening, right? These early movements on, and we're not going to spend too much time focusing on this, but look, it just ends up in these absurd vulture wars. So here is yet another situation. So let's say I'm sky high and I say, hey, okay, thinking about that game versus Ruby, I have this really nice plan sorted out against an opponent who goes for Goliaths and tanks in that mech sort of army. And that's how I'm going to play out my mid-game. I'm going to focus on getting vultures and mining up and containing. And against that tank Goliath, this is going to be my response. Here, in this game, you need to think, okay, my mid-game plan is to go for all these vultures to contain and to, get good position in the mid-game. But how do I transition later on if my opponent starts doing vultures here as well? And see, look, the starting point now is not the start of the game. It's not, well, how do I play this game from the beginning? It's how do I play this game from the standpoint of a dude who's going mass vulture. And yeah, seriously, apparently the answer is just to go masser vulture, which is fine, but this game was a useful example of players who are just vulturing each other to death because they both decided that is a reasonable mid-game plan, is a reasonable transition. And that is a stylistic choice, because we saw Ruby in the previous game transition straight to muscle units instead of staying with these finesseful vultures, instead of being really aggressive. So there, it sort of transitions into the usual sort of mid-game, but both players are battling a lot for control over the middle there. I really liked this game of Ruby versus Haya, because look how fast look how fast green goes for tanks. We actually see, you can barely see it on the minimap, I can probably see it clearer in mine. The fact that we have 3 factories with add-on in green's base. Both players did the identical opening. They both expanded with 1 factory and then add on the 2nd factory while they were expanding, except white added on 4 factories without the add-on. See, there we're seeing them right there. 4 factories without add-on, and is now going for mass vulture. And look at this brilliant transition, right? And this is very similar again to that Ruby game that we saw earlier. So green is going for more gas units, for more tanks, and as a result, he's inching his way to expand around. All mid-game considerations. Not a lot of dropships going on. Not a lot of dropships at all. Because, I mean, look at this. How are you going to get a dropship into your opponent's base? It comes to points at the end, so it's minimizing the amount of drop area. When he expands here and here, he still has an incredibly small amount. Dropships have to pass over a wide open middle, so why would you have any game plan that relies on dropships? And the answer should be, hey, I shouldn't. I really don't like that idea. Unless, of course, stylistically, you like it a lot and have figured out a way for it to work with your mid-game plan. But I mean, for instance, if you were in cross positions, I'd have a real hard time figuring out a way to use dropships there. And see, there's no mystery about that either. On a map like Moonglaive, that's way weirder, that's way twistier, with all these different paths to go around and all these weird high and low terrains, yeah, you're going to see tons of dropships. That's the only way you can maneuver around, and it's very natural to see that. And when players start watching games on Fighting Spirit, they'll see all these big vulture wars, and they'll see this big ground movement and that sort of thing, and they'll think to themselves, oh, we just coincidentally did not see dropships these games, because in so many Terran vs. Terrans I watch, I see dropships. Here, instead, what we're actually seeing is we are seeing the natural result of just thinking about how the map functions at a very basic level. No huge focus, no like getting the magnifying glass and going, oh, if I place tanks slightly to 1 hex to this place, I can hit mineral patch. No, none of that. We just say, holy cow, this map is open, and these expansions are a big deal. That's it. That was the extent of my analysis, and look how long I have been talking just about those few things. So see, look, the exact same response going on. This player, whoops, I didn't turn it down. This player is taking his expansions with his muscle units and keeping very, very cramped back. And white, using his vulture units and being aggressive, has all these mines laid across here and is trying to bust in these locations. By the way, for those of you who are unaware of this, vultures are your ticket to be aggressive in the early and mid-game as Terran. They take a good bit of damage, they're cheap, you don't have to waste gas on the tanks and Goliaths, which actually do a lot of damage. So yeah, that's why a lot of poking around to see if there's any opportunities to take advantage of that, to exploit that. So, and then moving right along, we have the usual sorts of stuffs going on with this player. Look at this player still creeping in, staying very, very very tight with his expanding. and this sort of diagonal line going across the middle of the map. And we are going to speed things up. This player is naturally going to be taking everything he can on this half of the map. This player is naturally going to be taking everything he can on his half of the map. And I'm really interested to see... Yeah, see, look, this makes the game a lot more balanced. The fact that white has this side and green has this side. And then we're starting to see some drops going on here. Both players are saying, let's trade mains. You're just trading mains like Pokemon cards, no big deal. It's sort of a fun little technique to do from time to time. And then the game proceeds into a sort of the usual late game. The last one I want to look at is another game between Notice and MVP. So, oh man, I am so bad at remembering to turn these things down. So, we have Notice here as the green Terran, and we have MVP here as the orange Terran, and for once, in all of the games that we have looked at, this is the first non-fast expand style play that we have checked out. And it is really important that you don't think to yourself, man, am I deciding between early expanding or am I deciding between 2 Starport Wraith? Begin with the mid-game and then say what opening best satisfies that plan. So I'm really interested to see what sort of fancy stuff is going to transition out of this 2-port Wraith choice for orange. So we see a little checking stuff out with these Wraiths. Probably going to need to get an armory soon because it's always embarrassing when you have like 2 Starport Wraith and you're trying to do something fancy-dancy with them and your opponent just gets cloak and you're like, dude. This is actually really popular. This is really an unbelievably high-level play. I'm going to ignore briefly the entire purpose of this talk, which is about mid-game planning and map analysis, but this opening is one of the most high-level things I've seen in a long time. You go 2-port Wraith, but only to make 2 Wraiths, because it convinces your opponent that a whole bunch of more Wraiths are going to be coming. And instead you just stop and you do some sort of early push. Haya did this, I believe, against somebody. Haya did it against some dude on Neo Harmony. It was someone good, like Flash or Flash. Yeah, Flash is a good player. But this is the sort of transition that you make out of it. And this is a little minor tactical abuse, taking advantage of, even though this is small, you can still get to it from this double bridge. But what I really want to do is move forward. So all this nice fancy aggression going on ends up getting repelled. So look at how low econ this is, right? Just basically 1 base versus 1 base. And this is the importantest thing to note in the whole world. Moving right along, you'll notice that there's a lot of battling going on. Okay, cool. What happens here is we still need to think about what our mid-game plans are going to be. Because honestly, if imagine this situation, and imagine this expansion not being here, but instead being right there, right? Let's swap these two. If we just looked at this map, we wouldn't say, this game's probably been going on for like 15 minutes already, and there's probably been an intense struggle. You would say to yourself, this looks kind of like a normal Terran mid-game. That's exactly what you should say. You should go, wow, yeah, this looks kind of normal. Awesome. And it's important you know now, as orange, having done this zany opening, what's going to happen in this normal, seemingly boring period. Don't obsess over the fact that this guy went 2-port Wraith, transitioned it into this weird, aggressive opening, and killed his opponent's natural expansion. You want to focus more on this sort of mid-game play. So I'm actually going to move way far forward. So here, we still see the same sort of issues that you have to deal with, excuse me, as we saw in the other games. The other games I was saying, and again, let's pretend we're down here in this bottom left corner. In that case, we would need to worry about losing control of this area right here, because it's really hard to exit either place, but for the same reasons that it's hard to drop. So we need to make sure that we get some secure position on this side of our double bridge. Or excuse me, of our single but very, very fat bridge. Looks almost like a double bridge. Excuse me, I'm coughing because I'm running low on green tea. But, yes. So we see right now that in this situation, we see orange pushing forward very early to the other side, excuse me, of this fat bridge. Excuse me. And, I mean, right now, nothing too weird is going on. Both players, or excuse me, neither player are going for vultures. Both are going for the just very standard muscle units for Goliaths and tanks and that sort of thing. But the sort of battles that they're doing, these sorts of back and forths in the middle, look exactly the same as those vulture battles that we were seeing, of both players sort of swinging with massive numbers back and forth at one another. And that is just all I want to emphasize in all these situations, is how similar all these things look. Even in this game, where we did not see that much vulture action, we saw lots of tanks, we saw wraiths early on, and we saw this incredibly nutty opening by the orange Terran. The fundamental structure of the map influenced the middle game in a way that you can see the connections between every other place. So I'm going to open this up for some questions as I sort of make some finishing thoughts. But yeah, I wanted to do these two matchups because Protoss vs. Zerg functions very, very differently from Terran vs. Terran, but I'm still applying the same principles in both cases. I'm still saying, hey, let's look at the mid-game, look at how everything guides our decision-making to that mid-game, and then let's think about what happens afterwards, think about what happens before. People are saying, what brand of green tea? Whatever brand my girlfriend bought. Yeah. So Spec, actually I like this question. Spec says, in your vocabulary, what is Zerg's muscle unit? Like Dragoons and tanks. The Hydralisk is the muscle unit for Zerg. Hydralisks are your sort of all-purpose strong unit. Zerglings, I would not label as a muscle unit. Just because in small numbers and middle numbers and large numbers they function drastically differently. But Hydralisks are just there to be strong. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, Scrick says, in all these games, I noticed you needed to do an epic nose scratch. Yeah, oh my god, for some reason, I just, like, it's like the tip of my nose. I don't know if I'm, like, turning into, like, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but the tip of my nose, for some reason, oh man, just had this, like, minor itch the whole time. And the problem is that, for some reason, the words I like saying a lot all have N's in them. You know, and like anytime I was saying about this mid-game push, the mid-game, it's like my nose would vibrate and I'd be like, itch it. So I kept like transitioning over just so I could take care of that just a little bit. So I'm only going to take a few questions because that was more of a podcast style video as opposed to a map, or excuse me, as a game analysis where there's a lot of, well, what about this? What about this regarding this game? So hopefully we can answer a few questions. So Noah says, what mid-game TVP build would you recommend for a newer player? Depends on the map. Look at the map and then say, how on earth can I take advantage of the map? So let's go ahead and transition to the screen, change to Fighting Spirit, and do a giant nose scratch. Oh, man, I needed that. God, I shouldn't even say needed anymore. Watch the Terran player. Oh, God, my nose itches. So, on this map, what I would say is, these three expansions are so easily available. Doing exactly what Flash did against Best seems great. Because if you push this way towards the Terran, towards the Protoss expansions, you can take this expansion. If you push this way, you can take this expansion. And then focusing all your early game efforts on learning how to defend from any sort of harassment, how to keep your opponent from expanding by having vultures plant mines everywhere, timing your armory, timing your factories. Those are the sorts of things that you're going to end up considering. So Arctic says, since proper macro seems to be the biggest hurdle for inexperienced players, what advice do you have for new players? Oh, you're going to love this. With macro difficulties. Oh my god, I have the best answer for this. Okay, let me just... Oh, I hope that came across on the microphone, because it sure as hell felt amazing on my end. What I recommend doing is going to play BGH, right? If you just play some 2v2v2v2s on BGH and go, you know, like 15 command centers before you end up building any units, you spend a lot of time focusing on your macro. In a more reasonable sense, what you should do is, in your game, you should just focus only on macro. You should make sure you have an excellent hotkey setup. Make sure that you are sacrificing everything to macro. And the number that you should look at is 500 minerals. If you get over 500 minerals, you should immediately say, holy shit, I am about to lose this game. It is that severe to let your minerals get that high. And I know people are like, but what about Terran versus Terran? My minerals get high in that. Yeah, obviously you're going to take that sort of statement with a grain of salt, but I set 500 because it's a fairly low amount. I mean, it's about enough for a Nexus or a command center, but really just constantly flooding it down. Just, whoa, God, ignoring everything else in terms of your game. I mean, a lot of times it's really easy to focus on following your build. Like, I actually have a friend who I was trying to teach this really easy Protoss opening to, and I was like, okay, this is actually the one I did in my podcast. I said, go for Stargate, and then for the Robo Bay, and then out on a gateway, and then get Dragoon range. And then you're going to do a Dragoon Reaver push. And she was so focused on doing that order that when her macro started to slip, she ended up at 900, and I was just like, just build something. You know, if your macro gets to 900, if you're at 900 minerals, just build anything. Just do it. So, yeah, I mean, that's really what you want to do, is just start saying, wow, man, I really need to start spending money. Because actually, a style of play that I used a lot in Zerg vs. Protoss involved building my first 4 hatcheries at 4 different bases. Because I was going for 3 hatch, doing the usual sort of tech to spire, but I noticed that I had about 280 minerals, 250 minerals at this part, and I said, well, that's not what I said. I didn't find it very profound to just cough a bunch. But what I said is, maybe I can just build an extra hatchery with an extra 250 minerals. And hey, now I'm starting to figure out all these new things I can do with this extra money. Man, I coughed a lot. My throat still itches. Now my nose itches. Oh, man. So, yeah. Continuing on the macro question. So it was like, have good macro, focus on it. I had one more thing to say, because really macro is just so important. But feel comfortable just sacrificing everything, losing stuff in battles. Seems fine to me. Oh my god. I like this question a lot because it relates back to the game. Someone said, if I lose map control on Fighting Spirit, how do I retake it in Zerg vs. Protoss? So, the answer to that is do not let that happen. Really, if you're playing correctly, one player should be emphasizing expansions, and the other player is emphasizing map control. If you're expanding a bunch and you have map control, you're almost certainly in a position to win. But really, if you lose map control as Protoss, focus on a really big push to, like, for instance, if your Zerg's on this top side of the map and, like, Call, you spawn down here, try to jut up right here in between the expansions. This is sort of the key position. Because if you're, sitting here, units can freely move back and forth here. But once you're planted there, Zerg suddenly has to do this sort of loop-de-loop-de-loo, or maybe sneak units over there. So this sort of thing, putting pressure on these ridges, I think is really strong. So I like looking at where my opponent's expansions are positioned and jutting in between is a very, very simple technique for regaining map control. So I will just take one more question. I will take Groby's question. What kind of Protoss openings do you think are effective in Fighting Spirit in Protoss vs. Protoss? What early game builds can give you advantages in relation to the other Protoss? I'm just going to do a very brief answer to that because we've been going for a little over an hour now, and I try to keep these at about that length. But some build that focuses on taking your first expansion early and your second expansion relatively early just because of the structure of the map. So a good example of that would be Han vs. Backhoe that actually just now is up on demand. The reason I don't like early aggression builds, like doing really huge pushes, is let's just take a look at the map. If I spawn here and I begin my plan of saying, okay, I'm going to start out and do some super early aggression, and then I'm going to expand here and expand here. That seems reasonable, but the problem is What if my opponent is all the way at the other side of the map? That's kind of a far distance, especially because you're going to need to use that Reaver early on in order to do any really effective push. I mean, obviously, unless you're doing like 4-gate Goon all-in, but I'm ignoring all-ins for now. So I like any build that focuses around getting that expansion early. And I think that the advantage that gives over other builds is that you can still do what you want to do, stay alive, and then get enough money, not to win it, but to secure the third. And that's a pretty key point to make. That I'm not just taking the expansion because I can, and expansions are awesome, but the primary purpose in my eyes is getting just a little bit of extra money early on so I can take that third. Also, in terms of considerations, what do you do afterwards? Do you go for big units? Do you go for... do I go for Reavers? Do I go for a slow army? Do I go for a fast army? That comes to how you want to deal with this center area and taking your expansions. As we saw Han do, Han stayed back tight on these expansions and got those Reavers early, made him immobile, but allowed him to do harassment. And that was his mid-game plan. I'm going to do harassment and build up a beautiful army in the mid-game that is an army of death. Backo, on the other hand, said, I'm going to take these expansions early, create a really big push for my mid-game, so that way I can take a fourth very early. Just the standard sorts of adjustments you're making for the mid-game. So that will about sum up the Day 9 Daily number 20. When we do the cast on Sunday, Day 9 Daily number 21, it will be the 1-month anniversary of me beginning this cast. So it is very, very exciting to have been doing this for a month now. And I've done 20 episodes, which means exactly 66% of the time I am doing a podcast on the day. So yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Be well and rest well and dream of large women. Cheers, everyone.